Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on whether you're watching live or recorded and where you happen to be. And welcome to another Tech Talk Tuesday. Haha, there we see. I told you we were going to get it wrong. Transmission Talk Tuesday. I'm your host, Jeff Welton. These are the weekly webinars where we have a whole lot of fun. We talk back and forth amongst ourselves, and hopefully some of y'all will get involved as well. Today's subject, project planning. My wife will tell you that when it comes to organization, I'm not the person to do it. So I got some people that actually know what they're talking about when it comes to this sort of thing. Pleased to welcome a good friend for we were discussing this before, almost 30 years we've known each other now, Gary Cavell. Gary Cavell is with Cavell and Mertz Associates. And we were joking earlier that Gary's wife would probably have been a better choice for actually organizing, but he's the radio guy in the family, so he's the one we got.
Gary,
welcome.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you again.
Hey, and look, Gary said he was playing with background so he could hide his messy office, but I said a tidy desk was a sign of an empty mind. So
I'm a healthy guy.
That's it. Also with us today, we've got one of Nautel's own, one of our senior project, I think our only senior project manager, Stephen Farley. Stephen's an ex-Navy guy, and he's been with us, 8 years now, Stephen?
I have. Good afternoon, and yes, you are correct.
And I should say Royal Navy, as the accent may give it away.
The Royal Navy, yes.
John Antonook is saying good morning because John's calling in from Alaska, where it is, if I'm not mistaken, 8 o'clock in the morning right now. Welcome, John. Welcome, everybody. So project planning. The cool thing is I've talked to both of these guys before we started, and over the years I've worked with both of them several times. Gary and I, our first project was at a 25 kilowatt near DC a lot of years ago. And Gary, you were mentioning earlier that was the project where just about everything went wrong.
All the way from the power pole down to the transmitter. The power company gave us the wrong service. They gave us the wired from the transformer wrong, and they fed the cables through the conduit. One of them had a slit in it, which made the conduit all of a sudden I'm very unhappy and blowing up transformer fuses. And that's where I learned new Canadian swear words. It was pretty funny.
Oh, maple syrup. On that note, the other thing that really intrigued me, Gary's more traditional. He's a pen and paper and printed matter sort of guy. And Steve, you work with a lot of electronic stuff as far as keeping track of scheduling and things. But I've noticed I've watched you both rely a lot on handwritten notes and ideas, and that was kind of cool. So the concept today, we're going to talk about just ideas and thoughts on how to organize a project, how to schedule, and whether we're talking a little thing like replacing a translator transmitter or doing a company-wide control surface upgrade, whatever. So some of the steps are the same, and we're going to have a little bit of fun. Before we get rolling too far, the usual standard housekeeping things. We do have a control panel on your GoToWebinar interface. I see John Antonook's found it already. If you have the little question box and type in a question. Yeah, all right, glad to be here. So we're gonna have some fun. As I said, type in your questions, wave your hand, whatever it takes, and by all means, make yourselves part of it. I see a lot of comments about my internet connection, so we're a good start already. That's the problem. Shane says I need to get the hamsters on the wheel. No comment. So that part is that. And then we go to our agenda, the same agenda as we do for every Transmission Talk Tuesday. We'll have our little discussion amongst ourselves and a little round table. I'll throw up our 4 basic topics, and this is what we're looking at right now. And we'll just sort of shoot around that. Not a lot of slides, a whole lot of conversation, and we'll see what we can do. Marco says we need to make the internet connection go boom, but I think it seems to be working on that all by itself. Now, Stephen, when we were talking about this yesterday, this was something that you said that really struck in my mind, maybe because of you were counting on your fingers, and I've got a family joke about that I may tell someday. But what was, you summed up project management in about 4 easy steps, and what were those?
So this is more actually when you're controlling a project, but all the, you talked about electronics and all that sort, all of that sort of aids to project management. Really, what you need to know is what you're going to deliver, who's going to deliver it, and when it's got to be delivered. Those are the three sort of big things that you need to get your project going. It is, what is it that you're actually delivering? When is it got to be delivered by? And who's going to do it? And that should start you off.
The other thing we tend to find a lot, and Gary, we've discussed that more than a few times, is when you get into a field situation, is who's going to be the boss? Who makes the decision? Because you can't have 85 chiefs and nobody doing the work.
Unfortunately, it gets fairly common where a lot of projects, the boss tends to rotate by who walks in the room and who yelled the loudest the last time. So it's getting if you're an on-the-site project manager, getting your bearings as who's really in charge. And the other thing is, what is the real audience? Is it the station owner? Is it station PD? It's one of these things where you have to satisfy that person, at least keep that in mind, I think. So project management is a bit of psychology, I would think.
And that's one of the things I know Steve has worked on quite a few times, is when we start a project, usually he'll bring in the stakeholders, the people that have an interest in the outcome, to sort of help to identify the parameters. Is that about right, Steve?
Yeah, and that's part of what I would call informal project management speak, your communication plan. So, who is communicating to who, how often they're communicating, and who needs to know what exact information. Like Gary just said, the station engineer probably wants to know different information than the actual station owner, and you just have to make sure that that information that you're giving to certain people is the right information. So looking ahead again at that communication.
You need to get buy-in too, I think, from the participants, yes. And particularly if somebody's feeling hurt, they want to be the project manager, or they're feeling ignored by the other participants. You start to become more of a psychologist, I think, so that you get, again, participation that's pulling in the same direction.
It's that famous phrase, using the phrase, I suggest, rather than I want you to do that, or I would suggest that you may feel like doing that. Or another one is, would you be willing? That often brings a lot of people that are against you, they're suddenly thinking, oh, actually, he's asking me if I'd be willing. I'd be really, that wouldn't be very nice of me if I said I'm not willing to help him. There's always a good phrase there.
Right, so becoming part of the process. Tim Sawyer makes a good comment. Really, the standard 4 W's: who, what, when, and where. And I'll add and this is where this comes in, the why, because if the people don't know why they're doing it, it's hard to get the buy-in. So definitely that's a good point. And Dave Raitner makes a good point. The one thing that we haven't mentioned yet is the budget, because I can make any project happen anywhere at any time if you throw enough money at it. So
and that's a fair point. I mean, that's part of the project management triangle of the budget, the deliverables, etc., the scope of the project, all those sort of things. So yeah, obviously understanding how much your budget is very important.
And you have to speak of time budget as well. And again, three famous words that always blows up: time and money budget. Can you just, somebody will ask, sure, I can add this, I can do that. And then things start to, it's called scope creep, I believe. And everything goes to hell pretty quickly.
Yeah, we were joking about that yesterday too. My wife, I'll walk in the room and say, I was thinking. And she'll just roll her eyes and that's it, because she knows it's either going to cost time, money, or some other, there's going to be some requirement. Let's put it that way. One of the things that a lot of people use, and Gary, you'd mentioned this yesterday, so I'm going to ping you for it, was the calendar. I mean, obviously time is a big part of the project. You mentioned the time budget. So tell me about the calendar.
Well, what I like to do, and a lot of folks like to do, is use a calendar. You can use an electronic version. You can try to wrestle with the Microsoft products. Because I'm ancient, I like to use a paper calendar because I also have a handy eraser. But a calendar you can set, if the blocks are big enough, you can set up benchmarks of time, benchmarks even in money, who's supposed to show up where. So that's kind of why I like to have a calendar, because also you can put in fudge factors and you can use pretty colored pencils to help trigger for you what's going on. Then you make a copy and distribute it to people who are interested. After about 5 days, nobody's going to look at it, but at least you're still organized. I don't know what your experience has been in that regard, but again, calendars are important, and you always have to put in, you talk to the manager, you talk to the owner, you talk to the audience. What is the real timeline? What do you really want? Because sometimes these guys will push the time backward in order to make their own deadline, knowing that it's going to go over. So you have to understand where they're coming from.
Right.
And is a deadline real?
And somebody with a lot of product or project management experience in the audience mentions the good, fast, cheap triangle. And I think you know that person, Gary, because you're married to her. So thanks, Cindy. That's a very good point. You know, good, fast, cheap. Pick two.
Exactly.
So,
Time, cost, quality. There's the project management triangle.
The same stuff, and you find it across all disciplines. It's kind of funny to talk to people in aviation or medicine. It's rather frightening, actually.
No, and somebody else throws in good, fast, cheap, and don't forget legal. Well, that just sucked all the fun out of it, but it's a really good point, especially with the stuff that we work with. There are some definite factors involved in legalities.
But you just mentioned though that it's all the different aviation and the medical field and this field, communications and radio, project management, or managing a project is. I've managed projects in the nuclear field, avionics, and I've mangled projects in this field now. But it's all the same thing. It's just basic communication. Like I said, understanding what you got to deliver, who's going to do it, when you got to do it by, and there's that one, how much it's going to cost. Understanding those things in whatever field you do, that is going to help you. And then moving, into a bit more sophisticated sort of project management is looking at the risks, which is basically just looking ahead to see what can trip you up as you do, try and deliver your project. And that is the most important thing, I think, in project management, is to look ahead. And that is what it is, mate. There's the controlling the now, but really, really good project management is about looking ahead and seeing what could trip you up, and then trying to put some sort of mitigating plans in place to help you not get tripped up.
Do the risk mitigation beforehand.
You see that a lot in transmission projects where you have transmitters and you start to get large power company problems, and then you have your friendly electrical inspector, and a lot of risk mitigation goes into trying to understand that up front. Are they going to want to see a UL label on something that never ever will have one, like a transmitter? So it's a lot of self-education and knowing when to call in a professional. You can't do all the wiring yourself sometimes. You may have to pay an electrician to do what you know how to do, and you stand there and buy him coffee, or you do it and he just feather beds.
Dustin Moore makes a good comment too, that no matter how much organization you have, ownership will usually ask questions to answers that you've already given them. So you're going to need some patience and understand you may repeat yourself a few times. This is where sometimes the electronic format is good if you have it set so one person can enter data, but several people can view it so they can see where the project is, but not mess with the system. The downside to that is the people that are going to ask the questions they already got the answers to aren't going to look at the calendar. I may or may not be that guy.
You have to make sure with electronic media that there's lots of colors for senior management. Senior management like colors. They don't like reading lots of stuff. They're too busy. They like lots of big, bright colors. Red, green, yellow, whatever you want to have. But big, bright colors.
You've got to keep it simple and digestible. Management has no patience for paragraphs. They want bullet points, sentences.
Yep.
And here's a consulting trick. If you have something unpleasant you want to tell them about, send them an email, put it in the middle of the email. and hello, you're wonderful, and the project's going great at the bottom, and in the middle is where we caught the house on fire. And you can say, hey, I told you. So another trick from Gary.
There. And Kim mentions too that one of the biggest problems they run against is not getting a clean statement of work in the very beginning due to lack of focus. And so that, there's all the pressure to get it done right now. And if you don't define the scope at the onset, it can really impact just about every aspect of the project.
And that's where you've got to, when you get that scope and you feel it's not clear, you've got to say to the, whoever the owner of that scope in the first place, whether it be the station engineer or the owner, you've got to say, what do you mean by that? You want this transmitter on a Wednesday, is it this Wednesday or next Wednesday, whatever. But the point being, you have to get it clear, get it down into bullet points, these are the deliverables, this one, and this one.
Don't you find that's where the budget gets out of kilter too, is all of a sudden we decide, oh, we do need backhoes and we do need heavier wire. And that's as you start to define the project, well, we didn't budget for that, and now it's your fault. So it's difficult. And that part of the planning part, I love the planning part of project management. But it's also difficult when you get people in the room and there's a deliverable and you've got to break that deliverable down into what you've actually got to try and the tasks and the things that you need. And that's when you've got to get into the nitty gritty, and people say, oh, I haven't got time for this. But that is the bit where if you don't do that first hard work on a project, you spend a day or 2 days just solid doing that work. If you don't do that, you will be tripped up later on. Like you said about you've forgotten that this cable or this tools are needed, and the budget goes up, and then because you've forgotten to order something, the time goes, which again will blow the budget, because time always increases budget. If you don't do those hard yards up front, then you'll get tripped up later on.
Right. I'm going to get him to open his mic. Shane Tovin from EMF is in the audience. And Shane, I think you've been asking your questions to Ed because he's just pinged me to say. So how about you? We've got you unmuted on this end. So how about you open the mic and tell us what's up? Because I know you've been involved in several projects over the years.
Yeah. I was mentioning, you made a comment earlier about transmitters and UL labels, Gary. And I have seen that as well. And one of the things that I've found is that when it comes to the local authorities having jurisdiction, or the AHJ, you're always better off. I see so many engineers who will just argue, until the cows come home. Because engineers, let's face it, some of us love to argue because we're right? No, some.
Don't you mean all?
Yeah. But anyway, you're better off when it comes to these local authorities having jurisdiction. You're better off working with them and maybe even educating them rather than trying to argue with them. I mean, you'll find in the end that there is going to be a compromise somewhere, something that meets code, something that still makes them happy, and still in the end accomplishes what needs to be accomplished. So
right, and that's a really good point. That's something that I run into a fair bit. Depending on, and we'll pick electrical inspectors, for example. NEC for many years, Article 250 has specified the facility ground and electrical ground must be tied together, bonded, I should say. But if you get some of the older inspectors, they'll get a little persnickety if you try to tie your facility and your RF ground into their AC ground. So, sometimes you do have to approach that pretty carefully.
One thing I found, Jeff, is if you can get a good electrician involved who you can get their attention, get them to understand your language, and let them be the interface between the project and the inspectors, that often helps out, because I know, well, they might have bribed them. No, they may know what the things are to say and not say, where you as an engineer want to explain. And sometimes it's better off not to say a damn thing and let the electrician put it in the coin that the inspector wants to hear, and everybody goes away happy drinking coffee.
And I've seen more than one where the facility ground got bonded to the electrical ground after the fact and then covered over with dirt, and everybody went away good. But
it could happen, yeah.
So moving on, at the moment, as an example, this was my desk Friday night. Well, it's my kitchen table, but it's where I
That's
was working at the
beautiful.
time. And we're putting a 2 transmitter site together in the upper Midwest. And so Thermobond sent us all the plans, and we're going through, and that was my mess. And so this is one of those where we've got the end user who just wants a transmitter site. We've got the local engineer who wants everything and the kitchen sink, including a kitchen to put it in. And washroom facilities. And then we've got the finance people who say, we're not paying for that. And then you got me, I'm just sort of doing this. I've already sold the transmitters. This is more a fun project. But it gets entertaining. And this is why, and I'm going to flip back to forward again to the calendar again. This is why I like the electronics, because I can save all that stuff as just electronic files and stuff like this. And Dave Reitner had asked whether Outlook Calendar does this, and the short answer is not easily. This particular calendar I've got here is it is a Microsoft. It's an Office 365 app called Project Planner. It's not necessarily the best one. I think we use Microsoft Project a lot at the office, don't we, Steve?
Yes, well, the project management team use Microsoft Project for ourselves, but as a company now, we're moving to Jira and Confluence or our sort of project management. There's a plugin for Jira that uses Gantt charts, etc.
Right. And I mean, I would say for me, for the personal stuff that I do, Microsoft Planner works because we are an Office 365 company, so we do have all the pieces in there to work with that, and it does make it easier. Lloyd Smith is asking what would be appropriate for a Mac, and my answer is I don't know, because I'm by virtue of what they use at the office, I'm a Microsoft guy. I don't have much Apple. Steve, how about you? Do you have Apple experience?
I don't, not as from project management tools, etc. But a really good, a simple tool for task management is just things like Trello, which is I think it's actually free. I use it for my Optimistic Gardener YouTube channel, getting that plug in there early. No, but I use it, when I'm creating the task for that, I use Trello, and that's a really easy tool for task management, because that's what you're doing when you're managing projects. You're managing tasks, aren't you? So that's one I do use myself. So putting it in different buckets, and you can use dates, etc., all that sort of stuff. So Trello is a good one.
Steve, I have a question for you. Sometimes in the larger projects, I guess you might see this more in television than in radio, but in the larger projects, you run into other professionals, architects and engineers and land use people, and they want everybody plugged into the same management tool. Have you found one that works and that everybody's using, or is it still sort of anarchy?
It's still anarchy, yeah.
Okay.
I'm working on a big sonar project, a D&D project, to upgrade the Halifax class sonar suites at the moment, and so I'm working with General Dynamics, D&D, our company, lots of different companies, and there's all sorts of different suites that they're all using. So yeah, it's very difficult to get everybody together. The one communication tool I have found that is Microsoft Teams, just from a communicating point of view, that works well between lots of different teams from different companies. Not so much a project management tool, but
right,
from a communicating point of view.
And Steve Neprath over in Minnesota mentions that Google Calendar works across pretty much all platforms, being browser-based, and it doesn't have all the management tools, but it does allow you to set up meetings and Hangouts and a whole bunch of other things related. So
Google's got some great stuff. And the important thing is not to get hung up by using all the different tools that are available. The important thing is understanding what you got to deliver, and having a Like if you're working on a short-term project, maybe having a daily stand-up, 15-minute stand-up at the start of every morning. If you're doing, you know, a project over a few weeks, if it's over electronic format, you know, Microsoft Teams or whatever it is, Skype, 15 minutes every morning. What am I doing today? What did I do yesterday towards, you know, completing the task that you're trying to do? And that's just keeps it simple. Keep it simple. What am I trying to achieve, and who's going to do it?
Very good, yeah. And Evan Perkins made a good point that he made it a little bit ago. There's always going to be the unknowns affecting budget and timeline, so you do have to build a little slop into your scheduling too.
Yeah, and I know this is one of my pet subjects that and everybody hates me going on about it all the time, but risk management, it sounds boring, sometimes can be boring when you're trying to think, you know, you've got all the tasks that you've got to deliver something, and you have to look at all of those tasks at what can go wrong, you know. When I was looking about installing a transmitter, lots of transmitters, you know, what happens if they're on top of a mountain or something like that? What happens if I get up there and I haven't got all the tools? Or what about the weather? Is the weather going to affect it? What happens if it snows? Can I get up there? Is there an alternate way of getting up there? You've got to look at all those things, and then you've got to act on the really good idea that you had to sort of get round of a subject. You can't just say, oh yeah, I've had that really good idea, and then not do anything about it. You've
Right.
got to think about these plans and then actually do something about it if it's that important.
Well,
Back to
and
the communications point of that, that's when local knowledge is incredibly important. If you know, I did something in New England, and I'm from New Orleans, and I don't understand from mountains and snow, and boy, did I learned the hard way that things are different when snow flies on mountains, and Louisiana boy learned a bit. And also cultural, I think Shane would know, and you folks at Nautel would know. It's funny, people do things differently, not only in different countries, but even within the borders of one country, local customs and how we handle things. Some people want to go right first thing in the morning. Other people are still nursing hangovers, and you'll never get somebody to work before 11. So understanding the local culture and how to work with people. Again, communicating, learning your client, learning who's there.
So my first project coming into Nautel was the largest AM radio digitization project in the world. 26 different high power AM radios all around India.
I know where this is going. I've been to India more than once.
I mean,
it's a lovely country.
I landed in Canada on the Friday, started work at Nautel on the Monday. There you go. Welcome. Here's your project, India. Have at it. You know, and Nautel had not really had that much experience in large projects and managing large projects, but you know, getting my head round that was a massive thing. And like you just mentioned about the local conditions, and you know, when I actually got there, I'm expecting 8 o'clock, let's get going, but there weren't really sort of the big wigs in India, in All India Radio, weren't sort of up and at 'em at 8 o'clock in the morning, not for me anyway. So it was like 12 o'clock lunchtime before I actually got anything going, and lots of the different things that I never knew until I actually sat down and understood from the local sort of people, this is the way things work. And you know, I'm straight in there like the naval person I was, up and at 'em. Well, I want this done this way and this done that way, and no, it didn't work that way at all.
So my running joke, and I've done several projects in India, and I love the people, love the country, but there needs to be a discussion about almost everything, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good way to make sure everybody's on the same page, but you do need to allow for that extra time when you're doing things.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
And that comes back to a question that Dustin had asked, and Gary, I'm going to hit you with this because you work a lot with construction permits and things that have definite, it must be done by this date type situations. And I know Cindy's in here, so maybe she'll chime in the comments because she did a lot of repack work, I know. So how do you know when you're approaching a project like this, how much slop to build in? Do you is it something done on the fly, or is there a standard, well, as a rule, it's going to take 10% longer and cost 5% more? How do you figure that out?
Well, again, I come at it from the consulting engineer point of view, whereas, okay, what are the federal deadlines? FAA, FCC, how much time do we have? Then you cozy up to the owner or the manager. Okay, what are your expectations? What's your CapEx budgets and how do those run? Because that wags the dog more than you might think. But FCC, there are very few soft walls. It's all, you have 3 years to construct in the United States and then you're done. You have to refile and go through the 90 days or so to get your permit again. So federal walls are hard. Budget walls are a little bit easier depending on the company. Now, I don't know if I'm answering what you're particularly going for, but you have to sort of suss out, I guess, make it up as you go along once you get past the hard boundaries that are set by governments.
Yeah, but surely also phoning up the local. How long does this normally take?
Yep.
Getting an idea that way.
Or again, tradesmen like the electrician, like the, or in some places we're working with people represented by unions, and each town and each union is different. And you can run into amazing complications if people aren't playing well together. And that's where folks that worked in New York or Chicago or Las Vegas, they all have different stories to tell about how things can get very complicated and unpleasant unless you are a good team builder and get communications going. It's often very frustrating. I think there have been projects at the Empire State Building that were amazingly complicated. Part of it was because of New York City rules on what you can do when. Like all those antennas on Empire, I believe, came up through an elevator. You can't use a helicopter up there. You can't use cranes. You can't interrupt a main street in New York City to do your silly construction projects. So everything's at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. It's every site has its way of inflicting its own pain on the project timeline.
Yeah, we had one in New Orleans where the back in your neck of the woods, where the transmitter suite is on the 27th floor. It's on the roof of a 25-story building. And there were 2 flights of stairs from 25 to 27, and they did a cardboard mock-up of the transmitter to verify they could get it up these flights of stairs. Unfortunately, they forgot to calculate that transmitters have both length, width, and height. And there was a concrete beam going across the stairwell on the 2nd floor. So they ended up going up 1.5 flights of stairs, then backing down 1.5 flights of stairs, taking the elevator down, shutting down Bourbon Street and doing a helicopter lift.
Was this the one where there was a bar between that last floor of the elevator and the roof?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's
that's very convenient. I like that.
Not so convenient when you're trying to move a transmitter through it.
Depends on your viewpoint, Jeff, but yeah.
Yeah, and so Cindy has mentioned that for construction purposes, definitely a 10% contingency when building buildings and towers that are weather affected. And that is a really good point there. Talking about the different cultural differences, Shane has been to India as well, and he mentioned that he noticed that there. And Kim mentioned that even within the U.S., New York City versus Puerto Rico, I mean, is a great example of time being very different from one place to another.
Hawaii is very famous for the manana thing. It takes a while, and if you're from the East Coast with your tie on, not going to work. Yeah. Slow down, relax, let somebody else take the lead.
Well, and the funny thing, my wife came from the Midwest and she moved up here and she said she can't believe how much slower the pace is here overall.
Wow.
And I know some people do get frustrated by it. So definitely tools wise, this is another shot from Microsoft Planner. And whatever you choose to use, as Stephen said, it's less about the tools you use, whether you're a pencil and paper kind of guy or all software all the time sort of person. It's more about making sure you've got the who, what, where, and when aspect of it, and have the scope figured out before you start assigning tasks and priorities. Is that about right, Stephen?
Yeah, it's. To me, first thing you do, like I said before, what are the deliverables? And then, who's going to actually create those deliverables, and then getting that team together and understanding for each one of those deliverables, what are the tasks you have to do to create that deliverable. Whether it be, that deliverable may be installing a transmitter. So, there's your deliverable, and then break it down. Right, so I need to get some right skilled personnel. I need to get the right tools. I need to have the right test equipment. I need a testing plan, and then put all of that work breakdown structure into a flow. So first of all, I need to do this, then I need to do that, then I need to do that. But that is basically a work breakdown structure turned into a Gantt chart. And a Gantt chart is just your calendar, isn't it? So right. That is just your flow of work. And then once you've done all of that sort of stuff, look at the risks of those things going wrong. And that's where you can calculate your contingency.
That's where a bit of local knowledge is important, but also knowledge of the vendors. And I won't speak ill of anybody, but there are some vendors, not Nautel, of course, that's notorious for making promises they can't keep. And we're talking about days or even weeks of promises broken of when something's going to show up. And that can grind the whole thing to a stop. So you need to understand that if we do this company or that company, there's likely to be an X% lag factor no matter how much you beat them up. And that's just the facts of doing a project. Some people don't deliver on time.
And so there's where a lessons learned from everyone. If you're doing repeat projects, always carry out a lessons learned at the end, and then those lessons can be turned into risks for the next project.
Yes.
So if you've dealt with that vendor before, what is the likelihood, what is the risk of them actually not delivering that piece of kit that you need on time? So you can build that into your sort of schedule then, and so right, there's a 50% chance of them actually not delivering something on time. So that really, I'm going to have to build that into an extra 2 weeks on the project, and that's where you sort of slops in there.
And that's a really, really good point, that the post-project debrief is almost as important as anything
Massively.
else. What have we learned from this that we can apply to the next one? So
hard to get done sometimes. People don't want to talk anymore. They want to just split,
Right,
and that's
done,
why
let's go home. Yeah,
and that's why it's a good idea to do it as you go along. If it's a longer project, you may want to do something, a lessons learned every couple of weeks or every month, and then you can build that library of lessons learned up to the end. And then as the project manager, you can create a report from those lessons learned that you've done all the way along. Or if it's just a short project, at the end of each day, you could be saying, right, what's going well that we're doing at the moment, or what's not going well? Well, you keep springing these jobs on me without giving me a couple of days of advance notice, or so every single day on a 2-week job, at the end of it, you might just do that quick lessons learned, what's going well, what's not going well, and then at the end of it, you put them all together again.
Right, and that's something Tim Sawyer made a good mention, particularly in what slipped, sort of a vendor report card. Remembering that anybody can slip on one thing, doesn't mean they'll slip on everything, but it's good to be aware that it's potentially an issue. What do they say? Fool me once, etc. Now, and lessons learned, it's a perfect lead in to this little collage right here. And I'm going to let Gary address this because these are his photos.
Oh Lord, this was a local project, a triplex of 3 stations, 50 kilowatts, 2 patterns each, no waiting. And it was a good project because the guy who managed it was the local engineer, or the group chief, a guy named Brian Edwards. And he's an intimidating kind of guy, which helps. So he knows how to get things done. But looking at the middle of the picture, everything was on time, and then it rained and rained and rained, and ditches started to cave in, and cable things started to get in trouble. And one of the things that happened is we're laying this 3-inch cable out to the side of the transmitter building, away from all the construction equipment. And of course, a truck comes along and flattens it, stops about 20 feet away, and we start raising hell and says, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything. We're taking pictures and complaining, but you got to call up Andrew or somebody and get a replacement chunk of cable. Things happen. No matter how diligent you are, they can slow things down. Again, contingencies, risks, we did everything right, stuff happened. things we didn't anticipate, the thing on the left, that's brass. And Jeff, I guess what, 1200 degrees Fahrenheit is where brass melts. But we had filters set up and we had them tuned up very nicely and had got isolation. But the other end of that thing on the left that you're looking at was about a half wavelength away from the filter and happened to be the exactly wrong length for some other frequency in the mix. And you didn't expect it to create a high voltage point, but it sure as hell did. And we had fire, carbon fire. Very unattractive thing to happen when people are pounding on you. Good, can we get on the air this week? So you're replacing things and coming up with alternatives. And this is with all the good engineers involved. Stuff can happen that didn't occur to you. Or the things on the right are brass balls, which are often required for projects. These are mounted at tower tops because we turned on all of this triplexer and congratulating ourselves when we start to hear the radio outside and a funny hissing noise. And we go outside and look around us. We look at the tower tops, nice blue flames coming off the tops of the towers. It's called corona. And of course, this was near an Air Force base and the helicopter guys are interested in what's going on there. So it was a lot of excitement. And we determined that the towers are short enough at the right frequencies to create corona. And if you spread the charge out by using brass balls on the ends of sticks, that made everything all happy. And they've been operating for years now that way. But at first, that was pretty exciting. I thought, that's cool, but we can't keep that. But it's really cool. So it's my version of boom.
The other thing you can do is the point discharge stuff, like the Cortana static cats, the intentional corona devices.
Sometimes you can't use them because you get way too much unintentional corona. So it's again, risk. What do you use? What should you not use?
And good example. I mean, those two brass balls on their own probably only cost what, $1,000, but hiring somebody to go up there and bolt them on probably ran a few dollars more than that.
And we had to take 3 stations off the air, and of course, everybody likes that. So that's.
And tower crews don't just happen to fall out of, well, we hope they don't fall out of the sky. They're not all over the place. And these days, more and more, it takes a little longer to book one. They don't just show up the next day for the most part.
So stuff will happen. Stuff will go wrong, even with the best project management, best planning, good engineers. Things will occur, and you need to be willing to think about them, not panic. How do we address them? How do we mitigate them? Don't do, Cindy probably can tell a better story than I, but don't get focused on the engineering problem. Get focused on a solution, not to the why this is happening, just how do we fix it? Engineers will get focused down into the little tiny nets, details of something. We don't care. Make it get back on the air. I don't care. Patch around it. So that's an important thing. Don't be an engineer when you're being an engineer.
And Mark Voris wondered about our thoughts on turnkey projects, because most of the projects he's done, he's had the ability to build them off-site, making the install easier and more efficient, like a translator. Well, and I know the folks in Rockland do this a lot, and several other groups where they'll build basically a whole transmitter site in a rack, but in a nice, comfortable warehouse, and then they can just throw it in a truck and take. And I'm way oversimplifying, but doing that as opposed to assembling it at the in the middle of the cow pasture. If you've got the option, would that be your preference?
Oh, hell yeah. It buys a lot. Again, the local electrical authorities view those more as appliances then. The building shows up pre-wired. You're just hooking to an external panel. They go away more quickly. So I like that for that reason. And again, building in the wild, even with an air-conditioned building, is kind of unpleasant and takes time. And you're not at your best, I think, as opposed to building in a warehouse. So
you're adding a lot more variables too. I know this project for the Midwest that I'm working on, one of the things we're looking at now is shipping the transmitters to Thermobond and having them installed and pre-wired and then ship the whole building as an assembled unit.
Yep.
And it'll cost us a little more up front, but in the long haul, it's probably going to save them quite a bit. So for that particular project, that may be a good option.
Stephen's probably run that Gantt chart for you, or a study for you. You got time cost versus capital cost, and sometimes prefabbing it makes a lot more sense at the end of the budget.
So I did tell you that the 6 or 7 Ps were going to show up. And this, that was just something I found on a Google for a project manager. Apparently, there are people that teach courses about project management. So, Steve, you might. So, anybody who doesn't know, Steve does a lot of cooking. He is an avid gardener, has a great gardening YouTube channel. What's the name of it, Stephen?
The Optimistic Gardener.
There you go. So if you're into, especially this latitude, he handles a lot of that sort of thing. But there'd be a little side channel for you, the project planning YouTube channel. Anyway, so KISS, of course, keep it simple. You can pick your last phrase. I like the original, but a lot of times we get mired in the minutia, the details, and lose sight of the bird's eye, the overall picture. And Stephen, I know several meetings we've been in where we'll have 2 or 3 people, and I may or may not be guilty of it, bickering about tiny little things and just totally losing sight of the entire project. How do you keep focus on that?
That is a difficult one. And I'm always having to pull people back up, and an easy way of doing that, or one of the easier ways of doing that, is at the start of a meeting, just say, this is what we're trying to accomplish in today's meeting. You know, we are trying to achieve a solution for this, or I want to understand how we install this transmitter, or whatever it is. That is what I want to understand. Put it up on the board. This is what we want to accomplish in the next hour. And every time people go down and off on their different parameters all over the place, tangents, you pull them back up and say, that's not helpful. I want to know this. And that's it. That's your start, and then put it up there on the board and keep pulling people back up again.
And I may or may not recall somebody, and I won't get the accent right, but somebody throwing a handful of whiteboard markers into a garbage can to make a nice loud clang, saying, right, we're not going anywhere today then, and walking out of the room. It got people's attention. Sometimes you got to wake them up to slow them down a little. So, nope, that is, I think, the big thing that I do tend to get stuck on sometimes is the details, and really the details.
You care. People care, and people care about the small things. You know, that is important. But you just got to come back up again and look down. And is that the bigger picture? What I want to accomplish from this meeting, or whatever it is you're trying to do.
And Gary, you're much more mild-mannered and not the cranky Navy kind of guy. So how do you how do you handle things like that?
It's they call me a consoling engineer for some reason. A lot of it is just trying to understand people as people and what their agendas are, what's important to them, because that will color their response to meetings, to project management. The other thing is understanding the psychology of managers and engineers a bit. I teach a course for the NAB for managers and owners on Engineering 101. In 3 hours, you know it all. But I also try to teach them about engineers. We are wired differently and think differently than managers. Most managers in radio and TV come from sales. They're different kinds of people. Their goals are different. So trying to get them on the same page. The big takeaway for the managers is engineers care more passionately about the station than you do. It's theirs. They've put time, money, probably their own money into it, unbeknownst to you. They care passionately. Engineers got to understand it's not your toy. It really is the other guy's money. And if it burns up because he made a bad decision, even though you told him not to, it's his toy. It's not yours. And bridging that gap and getting everybody to understand the perspectives can go a long way. Doesn't always stop the fights and the hatred, but it can go a long way to understanding the other guy. That's why I tell younger engineers when they're wiring a new studio, get the speakers going first, get the lights, put stuff in the rack and make sure all the lights are lit up, get the needles moving on the board. That way a manager walks in, oh, we're making progress. Maybe nothing works, but God, it looks like progress. So it's, again, about managing the expectations of yourself and the people you're working with.
Right. Yeah, and that's a really good point. And back on the assembling stuff in the warehouse and shipping it to the site, Sam Wallington made the comment that usually stuff gets placed carefully in the truck, but it's not always brought out of the truck the same way. And definitely there's some things that can happen from point A to point B. So again, the contingency plan's a good idea. Aaron Reed makes a comment specifically about radio that one thing he's learned the hard way is never do a build out without knowing what your STL is going to be beforehand.
Bingo.
And that's a really good point, Aaron. If you've got anything that involves a piece over here and a piece over there, make sure you know how those pieces are going to talk to each other before you start moving things.
Here's a hint, if I can interject, for an STL. Just because it looks good on paper, get to the top of the building or do a drone, but take a look at it, because in New Orleans, for example, at high tide on the Mississippi River, you can have a ship fade across your path.
Mm-hmm.
Or I think in Boston, there's some ship channel stuff that you have to worry about. Have to be careful how you say that.
Yeah.
There can be airport fade if you're too close to an approach to a runway and they fly bigger jets. It's amazing what can, or some idiot builds a building 3 years from now across your path. You have to keep monitoring and watching.
Two good examples of that. We were running a digital link for HD radio across an Air Force base. And okay, so this was a narrow band STL, digital STL, won't mention the name, but it's a popular company. And every time a plane took off, the link dropped out. And of course, HD radio, you lose a frame, you've lost 8 seconds or a second and a half audio. So that'd be one example. Another one, a little closer to home, the station I volunteer some time at. We originally had our studio at one location. We were planning on doing a Ubiquity, a Wi-Fi shot to the transmitter site. And everything was carefully, ran the path plots, everything was carefully thought out, except that the particular path plotter program that we used didn't allow for foliage. And when you've got 60-foot old growth forest on the ridge between you and there, that makes a little difference on what your Wi-Fi bridge can accommodate.
And seasons. Things looks clear in the winter, then you have spring.
Yeah, and Mark makes the comment, or in Nebraska, somebody builds a grain elevator.
So that's where a good scenario planning, walking through the actual installation or walking through and then thinking, right, what can affect us as we're doing this? And again, there's that weather or are there any airports, or is there any planes coming past, or that ship, or anything?
The what ifs.
Just walking around and through the job that you're doing, getting that picture of all the things. In India, when we were doing one of the sites in India, we had to, so the DRM the rooms where we had to put all the gear in was at, down by the down by the antenna, and you had to walk through this grass field, but we had to do it at night. And we didn't realize that it was going to be absolutely swamped by snakes in this path, so because we didn't walk through that sort of what can affect us. I know that's but that's understanding that, like you said, the local sort of conditions, but walking through that, we may have picked that up, that what could have affected us, like tigers or snakes or something bizarre like that.
I've had crocodiles at a site in Paraguay where we just couldn't inspect the antenna system at all without a little bit of assistance, if you will. Kim mentions, definitely the winter and the mountaintops. I mean, we've got sites in Utah at over 12,000 feet in the air, and 12,000 feet above sea level. And I've been up there in July building snowmen, which was considered, it was a good way to spend a break. And
that, Jeff, is when your knowledge comes in, because sometimes your transmitters need to be thought of if you're at a 12,000 foot site. Are the blowers enough? Do you need something differently?
Right, because the airflow definitely derates for every 1,000 feet above sea level. And that's why Kim mentions that it's really important to do a site visit and a scope of work as if you're planning to go on air that day.
Massively,
Because, you know, if you, I mean, you can swap well, like again with the one in New Orleans in the flights of stairs. If I'd been there, I'd like to think that I'd have noticed the big beams. I don't think our transmitter is going to fit under that. But somebody who's not familiar with it, they just do a cardboard cutout, and so yeah, it is definitely an issue to
but
you know,
that cardboard
critical.
cutout was a good idea.
Oh,
It just
it was
the wrong
good.
cardboard cutout, wasn't it? It wasn't a full cardboard cutout. If it had been a proper one, the exact size of the transmitter, it would have probably shown it.
Oh
wouldn't it?
no, it was a wonderful idea. It's just the execution needed
The execution
a
of it
little
wasn't.
finesse.
Yeah.
You know, and details like Aaron mentions, looking at heating and cooling, different types of equipment, because you can exceed the limits of whatever the transmitter uses. Let's see, Rhode Island,
company.
several.
You
Yeah.
know, do you have enough juice to get to the site? I mean, you don't think about it. They have a X kilowatt transmitter. They can take a 50 kilowatt. No, not necessarily. And that can take, that's a risk. You can have a delay in the power company deciding to help you. And what's it, $10,000 US per mile or something ridiculous? It's some big cost for them to even think about it. So site survey.
So here's another one, Rhode Island, several landlink radios got shut down because state put in truck trolls on I-95 right next to a big studio building. And the tolls use transponders, the unlicensed frequencies, very close to the unlicensed 900 meg that the landlinks work on. So sometimes, well, and we've all heard situations of you know, satellite dropouts or garage door openers causing 900 meg stuff to go down. So so that's a good point. Oh, and yeah, Kim mentions they've got a question on there. There's a good point. It's a separate good point, but a question on the site walk form. Having a site walk form, number one, is an excellent thing. Our field service guys, they do have a little site evaluation checklist as well. But look at the door of the building, look at the dimensions of your equipment. Will it fit? I've actually had situations where people have taken delivery of a transmitter and then discovered it wouldn't go through the door, even though they've had that information for quite a while.
Didn't we have one in the Philippines?
We've had one there. I had one in San Francisco where they had to bring in a crane, blow out the second story of the building, and crane lift the wall on the second floor, and then crane lift the transmitters in through the second floor wall. So it happens more than we'd probably like to admit. Well, and let's see. I think we're near the end of the slideshow here. So the project I'm working on, that was a statement from the local consultant, and that was I put it up there because, as I said before, I can get mired in the details sometimes, and so that's my reminder to slow down and look at the bigger picture. We're right at the top of the hour. Let's see. Lewis Downey mentioned that a detailed drawing with dimensional considerations for racks, coax switches, etc. He likes Vizio. Oh, Jerry Olson asked for the 6 or 7 Ps. Stephen, you're the Navy guy. You can hit that with just as a ring.
That's one of my favorite sayings. Prior preparation prevents piss poor performance.
And there you go, Jerry. On that note, folks, it is 2:01. I want to thank you very much for spending part of your day with us. If you're watching it on archive, for investing some time in this. Don't forget that Nautel webinars do qualify for half of a recertification credit under SBE Category I for your research. So if you're certified, it's a good point to add it to your form. These are archived. You can find them on our YouTube channel or on our website under webinars, resources, I believe. So again, Gary, Stephen, thank you very much for spending some time with us. It's been a fun little journey.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very much enjoyed it.
And folks, thank you all very much at all. We'll flick through. So other information, if you want to look for it, we certainly have it. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.